Hey, hello, and welcome to another one of these monthly lives that I've been doing all this year, talking to Ukrainian teachers of English about the way in which Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine has affected them, has affected their lives, their families, their teaching, and, the language that they're teaching, and so on. Thanks to everyone joining us at the moment. I'll just wait for this month's guest, Alina, to arrive. I'm hoping she's going to appear at some point and I'll get her to join when she does. Hey to everyone who's finally turning up here. Thank you very much for joining us. It's actually been a little bit over 1 month since the last one of these I've done. I've been working like mad trying to finish off Outcomes 3rd edition, and we're almost there on this, so that's a very, very good feeling. I'm just waiting to see Alina come through. If you're not Alina and you're asking to join and go live, that's not going to happen. So sorry whoever Lulilika is. I'm waiting basically just for my Ukrainian guest for this month, and I won't be adding anyone else live, so my apologies, but nice try. You can always try. Not sure why you'd want to, but there you go. I'll wait for a couple more minutes and see what else happens. Yeah, greetings from North London, October the 1st. Oh, that was you, Lucia. Hey, you've done it again. It's a mistake you keep making, Lucia. You're pressing the wrong button. I don't know what you're doing there. Yeah. Hey, everyone, anyway. It feels like I've just been on a non-stop work bender recently, what with the writing. And last weekend I was in Poland, IATEFL. Next weekend I'm going to be in Budapest for Hungary, IATEFL. And Lucia, you've done it again. You've sent another live request. I think you should just keep your hands away from the telephone. Do I really call it an Indian summer? Yeah. I mean, if you've had a long summer and it's been a nice summer and the summer continues into September, kind of till the end of September, you might kind of say, we've been having a bit of an Indian summer here. Yeah. We didn't really have much of a summer here, so it was basically like we didn't really have a summer, and then suddenly in the middle of September we had a kind of heat wave, which was a bit weird. Alina, hello. I can see you joining there. Welcome. Hey, let me just wait a minute. Hi, Mohammed. Thank you for joining us. I was also an English literature graduate.
Minute.
Hey, Alina.
Hi.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, welcome.
Yeah, I think I don't see a video yet, but I think I should give Instagram a minute to just,
Okay. I hear
Oh.
you okay, so all good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Super.
You hear me okay anyway?
Yeah. The sound is great.
Good. How are you? And where are you?
I'm in Poland. Since last spring, I'm in the spring of 2022. I'm in a small town called Opole. It's in this part called Śląsk.
Yeah.
So it's closer to Czech Republic. And it's very small, really, after Kiev, because, I lived most of my life in Kiev, which had 5 million people. And Opole has 120,000 people, so much less.
I don't know if you know, but in the 60s and 70s, Opole used to have big pop festivals.
Yeah, it is officially called the home of Polish song. And they have this very nice big scene here where all these people like Marilla Rodowicz perform. So, I'm a little bit too young for that. for that kind of music, but I obviously know that she exists, right? So I know some Polish like singers of that time.
Yeah. And how are you? I realise
Busy.
the question. I mean, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so, being a refugee, it means that I have to juggle a little bit more things. For example, right now I'm in the process of finding and renting a new apartment,
okay.
and it means that I'm going to move this month. So right now my mind is busily thinking how many things I need before I go, what I need to buy, I have to go to IKEA, and so on. Yeah, so
Are you looking at
and because
the moment?
yeah,
Yeah.
uh, say
Are you
again.
looking to stay in Opole at the moment in Poland?
Yeah, yeah, because I actually live here with a close friend, and her mom is sick,
Yeah.
and she is getting treatment here from
Yeah.
cancer. So we are kind of stuck in Opole until next summer, probably, and we didn't plan
Yeah. Yeah.
that. We were planning to move into something bigger, but unfortunately, the treatment is much longer than we were
Yeah.
thinking of. So
How,
yeah, we are kind of tied.
how's your Polish these days?
Polish, I actually don't speak it much. I have an interesting story about Polish. I grew up in Lviv, and at that time, I still had some people who were of Polish descent as my neighbors, and there were Polish TV
Yeah.
channels. So I heard Polish and I can read in Polish, but I read much, much better than I speak. So I can read, I don't know, Sienkiewicz, for example. This is like Polish classic. Everyone reads it, that at school. I can read Sapkowski, who wrote The Witcher. I can read pretty much anything, but when it comes to speaking, I didn't have a lot of experience talking in Polish.
Okay.
So Polish pronunciation is a whole other world, and they have a lot of interesting sounds that other languages don't have.
Yeah.
And also the spelling is quite a problem. So when I first saw some Polish words, I was like, nope. There are four consonants, one
I
after
know.
another. How am I supposed to read
And
that?
two of them are Z.
Yeah.
D Z S C Y W. Yeah, I know. I mean, it's funny. The Polish people I know tell me that when you know the rules of Polish spelling, it's very
Hmm.
regular. It all makes
Yeah.
perfect sense, and I'm sure that's true. But when you don't know the rules and you're seeing something
Hmm.
WROCLAW, and they're telling you, "Oh yeah, Wrocław," and you're like, "Right, you from Rocklaw, okay." Yeah. So thank you very much for us. I know that you've got a lot else on your plate, and it's I know it's not easy to ask people to talk about what's going on. I've had quite a few people who volunteered and then decided they can't bring themselves to talk about things, and I completely understand that. And I know
Hmm.
it's easy for me to sit here in North London, where I don't have family being shelled or whatever, and ask about things and talk about things. So thank you very much for joining us. Um, could you begin? Could you just tell us a bit about yourself, your family, where you grew up, what your background is? You said you grew up in
Hmm.
Lviv.
Yeah, I grew up in Lviv. My parents are from the west of Ukraine, both of them, and they are
Okay.
musicians. So they actually went to Lviv to study in the
Mm,
conservatory. And they got married when they were quite young, and they had me. So as a child, I grew up in this kind of musical surrounding because I went with them to the conservatory. Then my mom started working at the opera theater, and I went with her to the opera theater, and I went with dad to many concerts because he is a bass guitar player. So I kind of grew up in the wings of some performance because we didn't have any other relatives in Lviv, so they had to take me around wherever they went. And of course, as a kid, I always thought that I would be a performer. I wanted to a dancer. I went to ballet school, and I was kind of getting ready to, grow up and join the circus.
Yeah.
But and I still feel a lot of, love for dancing, for music. I actually dance. I haven't danced properly since I left Ukraine, because here I only dance on Zoom, and of course it's not the same. But I don't do it as a profession. And that was actually what my parents wanted. They said, this is so hard to make a living when you're an artist. It's better if you have like a normal job.
Trade.
And because I had this kind of like inclination towards languages, at some point I became a teacher, but I think we'll talk about that later.
And when you were growing up, what languages were you speaking? Was your family like a...
Uh, my native language is Ukrainian. So I spoke Ukrainian first, but I was born in 1986. So when the Soviet Union was still around, and it means that a lot of books that I read were in Russian.
Yeah.
There were some books in Ukrainian at that time, because when Ukraine became independent, a lot of books were published in Ukrainian. But I read a lot. I was an avid reader since I was less than 2 years old, and it meant that I always needed new books. So I ended up reading everything that I could potentially, get, and a lot of books were in Russian. So I had to learn Russian as well, just to be able to understand what is written in those stories.
And were you...
And also,
Sorry.
mhm. And when I think it was like 6 or 7 years old, my mom took me to a private teacher, and I started studying
Okay.
English. And at that time we didn't have internet, so she gave me books in English, and they were not adapted for children. They were just books in English.
Wow.
And I kind of had to develop my linguistic intuition, because they were fairy tales or something like that, and I really wanted to understand what these books were about. I wanted to read the story until the end, so I had to try to guess. And we had a dictionary like this size, so if this word was in the dictionary, I would find it. If it wasn't there, I would just try to guess, what it potentially means.
And did your parents speak English?
No.
Nothing. Okay. But they...
No. Well, my dad kind of, he knows bits and pieces, because as a musician he had to travel, and he even worked sometime on a cruise liner.
Okay.
I think 2 or 3 times in his life, so he had to learn some English. But and my mom loves everything British, so she often watches some TV shows. She loves reading British literature. So I think she understands English, but she doesn't really speak it. So I'm the only one who actually can communicate.
Okay. And when you were like studying at school and then at university, were you studying exclusively in Ukrainian?
Yeah. I was studying in Ukrainian. I went to Ukrainian schools, and also I always studied in those schools that had a lot of English. They are called specialized schools in Ukraine, so it means that I had 5-6 lessons of English per week.
Wow.
So I kind of grew up, thinking in all those 3 languages, so I could, move between them.
Yeah.
Because I had to speak English every day at school, right? So, and I read books in English, and I would say that I'm bilingual, because I can move smoothly between the languages, but because, English has been this part of my life for 30 years, I think in English, and so on. So I don't feel this kind of transition in my head when I start speaking one language or the other.
It was one thing that struck me when I first started coming to Ukraine, was just how effortlessly most people switched between Russian and Ukrainian. That depending to people would speak one language or the other, and it would be like, what is it you're going to talk to me? Okay, we'll do it that way. Okay, we'll do it this way. And that just seemed very, very normal. And, it's interesting coming from a very, very monolingual country where English people are particularly terrible at learning foreign languages. Um, going somewhere, you know, it's like going to Switzerland where everybody speaks 2, 3, 4 languages,
Uh-huh.
and being in that environment where people were so comfortable switching all the time was really, really noticeable and interesting for me.
Mm.
Obviously not without problems, I guess, as we'll maybe talk about as we go on.
Yeah, it wasn't just a culture thing, I think very much Ukrainian was the language which was oppressed
Yeah,
for many
yeah,
centuries, and I think Russia did a lot of things to make Ukrainian viewed as rather a peasant language, a language of the lower
yeah.
classes. So like, if you started speaking Ukrainian in Kiev, I moved to Kiev with my parents when I was 13,
30,
and this is when I felt it. Yeah, 13 because my father got a better job in Kiev. It was a crisis of the, between, so we moved in
okay,
2000. And when I moved, I realized that everyone in the streets was speaking
yeah,
Russian. And I was kind of shocked because I grew up in this like, well, we did speak Russian in Lviv as well, but it was only in the theater because you see, the theater, the opera theater, means that at that time there were a lot of people in the theater who were speaking Russian because they actually were Russian. In the Soviet times, performers often went around the whole Soviet Union, found a place to work, and stayed. So in the theater, there were people from Russia and from Belarus, and they spoke Russian. So my mom, for example, learned to speak Russian to talk
yeah,
to them. And I was speaking Russian to them when they said something to me because I was a kid. So out of pure respect, I had to. But in Kiev, it felt differently. It was as if when I started speaking Ukrainian, this was one of the reasons why people bullied me at school
yeah,
because I spoke Ukrainian and I represented a different
yeah,
culture, um, and a different kind of mentality, I would say.
yeah, 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 yeah. I mean,
So I felt this very sharply, and especially in the music. Well, because music was like a big part of my life. So at that time, 20 something years ago, everyone was listening to Russian music. People were watching Russian TV channels, Russian TV shows, Russian jokes, the KVN, which is, this like stand-up comedy show. Um, People were using a lot of things connected with the Soviet Russian stuff, like quoting Soviet films, for example.
yeah,
And it was a completely different environment.
yeah, 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 yeah,
And at that time, Ukrainian was not the language which you spoke when you wanted to blend in. If you wanted to blend in, you started speaking Russian. And I would say that it was much later, like 10 years later, uh, 15 years later, when the patriotism actually started happening, especially with the younger generation.
yeah,
I think when we were already before graduation from school, I think that was the year when something started changing, and some other people in our class also started speaking Ukrainian publicly.
yeah. It's fun.
But before that, nope.
The
Yeah.
guest I had last month was originally from Lugansk, and she was saying that right up until 2014, she was still in a very Russian speaking environment.
Yep.
And she was receiving all of the kind of Russian language propaganda about,
Mhm.
oh, the evil Nazi government in Kiev, they're going to kill all of the Russian speakers. And in 2014, when the invasion happened, she moved to Kiev. And she said, to
Mhm.
begin a bit scared, like, as a Russian speaker, what will happen to me? And of course, she got to Kiev, and it's like, wait a minute, most people are speaking Russian. It's like we
Yeah.
lied to here. And you realize how powerful that kind of mythology is, and how powerful the,
Yeah.
that kind of Russian imperialist idea that if you speak Russian, you are therefore Russian. And
Yeah, precisely.
it's, as an English person, it's a kind of insane idea, because I understand that people around the world speak my language because of imperial colonialism, And I don't look at
Hmm.
or people from New Zealand and think, oh, there are ethnic English people. You know, I just think there are people who, because of my country's colonialism, ended up speaking English. And I think Russia's been very clever at using that idea of our people to kind of manipulate and control and justify its actions in that way. And, you know, you see it with other countries, like with Kazakhstan, with Moldova, with, you know, Georgia, this kind of linguistic imperialism.
Hmm.
Yeah, and it takes a long time to kind of emerge from under that, I think. And I guess what's happening now with Ukrainian is it's accelerating at a kind of hyper speed, you know? It's like
Yeah.
decolonization at high speed.
I would say that on a global level, it started happening in
Yeah,
2014. You know, I think Maidan was actually this border that we crossed and never looked back,
yeah,
because it was a point of no return in all understanding. You know, it was such a shock to me when it happened, because, you know, I'm old enough to remember the 2004 revolution, and it was mostly
yeah,
peaceful. You know, we were students. I was in my first year at the university, and I remember that it was a sort of a holiday celebration. You know, our teacher would tell us, "Come on, let's skip the class. Go to Maidan." When, you know, people wanted Yushchenko, and everyone was wearing orange,
yeah.
and we wore some, you know, a strip of orange cloth on our clothes or something. And this teacher that let us skip the lessons, he dyed his hair orange. And I would say that he was in his 60s, so it looked very weird. So he had this, like, you know, cloud of orange hair. Yeah. And, you know, at that time, it didn't feel like some kind of bloody protest. It just felt like something very useful, very full of energy, you know, very much alive. Like, you know, this old system was kind of, you know, like the whole country was kind of shedding the skin without violence, right? And Yushchenko was chosen. And I think we were really optimistic about that. But then, you know, 10 years later, when Maidan happened, the atmosphere was completely
Yeah,
different. Because before that, you know, Yanukovych had stolen the elections, and the elections were rigged, and everyone knew that.
yeah,
So I would say that at that moment, I was very pessimistic. I felt like, you know, like nothing could change for the better, because we all knew that he represented basically the mafia.
yeah,
So he wasn't just a regular guy, you know. So there were some, like, big people who gave him protection, and these big people would decide what will happen in the country, and it was really very dangerous. And at that time, I think it was the first time when I thought about emigrating, because I thought if Yanukovych stays and we join Russia, then there will be no
yeah,
future in this country. And I remember that a lot of my friends who are, you know, intelligent people and young, they had the same thoughts, that nothing could be changed for the
yeah,
better. And then Maidan happened, and it was a shock, because it started with this moment when students were beaten, and this is what made people really angry. And next day, a lot of adults came out to say, "You can't beat our
yeah,
children." So I think this was a real point of no return. You know, I actually get this goosebumps when I speak, because it was incredible. You know, I
Well,
actually I didn't think that it was possible.
Alina, well,
Mhm.
on the Maidan at some point in 2014.
I wasn't a protester. Because, you know, this protest, they were bloody from the very beginning. I'm very small. I mean, I'm like, you know, five 5 feet tall, something, 1 meter 50 centimeters, something like that. So I'm small. I have small hands. You know, I'm very fragile, and I realized that I would be rather a liability if I, you know, went there and tried to do something. I wouldn't be able to do anything. I'm not a fighter. I have never fought anyone in my whole life, you know. So I felt that I would be rather dragging people
Yeah,
behind and I didn't want that. But I supported Maidan, and a lot of my friends, they were out there standing even during the
Yeah,
bloodiest days.
yeah. When they
And
shot every.
yeah, when they shot, and it was kind of out of the blue. I mean, I couldn't believe what was happening. I actually had work near Arsenalna metro station. It's in the center, so Institutska is like 10 minutes walk, and I had to go to work because, I was a freelancer teacher at that moment, and I had to support myself. So I had to go to work every day. And when I was going out of the metro station, I just saw these people, the thugs that were like pro-Yanukovych, and they were sleeping there on the floor, on the ground, drunk. And it was like very, very weird and scary to see that. So we could obviously see that, those protesters that supported Yanukovych, that they were just,
Yeah,
doing it for money, and that they were getting just cash in hand so they could buy some alcohol and just, doze off in the corner until the next time. And it was a horrible several months. But what I couldn't believe that when the war actually broke out, and when the Crimea was annexed, it was like seeing a nightmare. I couldn't believe that it was happening. I think, before that, before the war, we, I wouldn't say that we were kind of friends with Russia, but certainly there was a long-term
yeah,
relationship. So, it was this feeling like your relative suddenly attacked you, like your relative became a psycho
yeah.
and stuck a
Well,
knife
and
in your back.
I guess in lots of situations it was quite literally relatives attacking as
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
You
precisely,
know.
precisely. Well, yeah, because a lot of families in Ukraine, because of the Soviet politics, when they would take a family and move them somewhere, so a lot of people, they were either moved forcibly or they were moved around the union because of the job, So all military families, for example, they had this kind of turbulent past where their family always had to move house, and they would go somewhere to Far East, to something like Vladivostok from Kiev, and then come back and live in this kind of like military encampments. So a lot of families, they were mixed ethnicity. Even I had this situation in my family. My great grandfather was Russian, and he came to work in Ukraine and met my great grandmother and fell in love and started living with her in the north of Ukraine in Chernihiv region.
Yeah,
So even I, on my maternal side, have some Russian blood
yeah,
because at that time it was a norm, right? So it was actively encouraged, and the state actually created the situations in which people would not have roots. They would rather have loyalty only to the
yeah,
state because the state would give them something like a flat or a car. So a lot of people, they would like the Soviet government because they thought Soviet government gave us something. Um, and they never asked themselves a question, how was it possible that someone got a flat for free?
yeah. I guess this also explains to some degree why you still have people inside Russia who will move to Mariupol or Lugansk or Donetsk, buy houses that have been stolen or taken or abandoned by people who've left. And I guess,
Hmm.
the state's given me something for free. There's a property. Who am I to argue? Who cares what
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
built on? I guess.
There is a very famous painting from the Soviet times when a family with a young pioneer girl and some parents, they just kind of move in into a big flat. And in the Soviet times, it was kind of representing this, young communists who were given the flat. But when we look at it from the perspective of today, we all realize that there is this darker truth that the owners of this flat have been shot, or maybe have been taken forcibly and moved to a camp in Siberia where they
Yeah,
died.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
So this flood did not just appear magically on the market. It appeared because someone died.
yeah. And the
And you know,
sorry, go on.
yeah, I just wanted to say that my own great grandmother from my paternal side, she was in camp in Siberia because she was a peasant, she was rich, and the government didn't like that, and they arrested her, and she spent several years in a camp, and she only survived because she was a very good seamstress. She made
Yeah,
dresses,
yeah,
and some people who governed this camp, they had wives, and these wives asked her, like, Maria, can you go and make dresses for us? And for this, we will save you from the hardest work. So they had a sort of a deal.
yeah,
And then when Stalin died, the non-political prisoners had an amnesty. So she went out and came back and lived a rather long life, but her health was broken.
yeah,
I see her pictures. I have a picture of her when she was a young woman just getting married, and a picture of her when she just had her first children, and then a picture of her just immediately after Siberia, and it's like she aged
uh,
20 years.
it's like when you see the pictures of the Azov defenders and the way
Precisely.
of being in captivity for so long, and you see these guys
Yeah. Yeah.
2 years ago were my height and muscly, and they're now skin and bones, basically. You know,
Hmm.
what the system seems.
And bones that have been broken on
Yeah,
purpose,
yeah,
because there is one person in Azov regiment whose story struck me like really deeply because he's a musician. His name is Mikhailo, and I think that a lot of people saw his picture in
the
Azovstal
arm.
when he was smiling, and he had this big metal thing on his hand,
Yeah,
and then just immediately after the release from captivity, he's so impossibly thin, and his arm was broken and dislocated on purpose so that he wouldn't be able to play anymore. And I think this is a horrible but a very good example of what the system does to people. It breaks them and doesn't set them right after it breaks them. It sets them wrong.
yeah,
So it makes them broken for the rest of their lives. It was like a big experiment of destroying any empathy in
yeah,
people. I mean, what the communists, what the Soviet government did. Because, for example, if your neighbors were taken, you had to keep silence and you had to try to pretend that these people never existed.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And this was the regular norm, right? When people's names were covered with black or cut out, and people, even on photographs, someone who has fallen out of grace with the party, they would cut him out from the
yeah,
photograph.
yeah,
And this is such a literal thing that they would destroy not only the person, but they would destroy this person's name, they would destroy the memory that this person ever existed, and they would force people to completely disintegrate anything that would remind them of this relative, for example, that was taken. Like this person was never even alive in the first
and
place.
and I
Not just, you know,
sorry, go on, Alina.
yeah, like, it wasn't enough just to call someone the enemy of the people. This person had to be erased. And this is what they're doing right now, as the war is raging on. For example, Mariupol has been erased.
Yeah,
They have destroyed the buildings where the dead were
yeah,
lying to be able to say that there are no
yeah,
dead because there are no
yeah,
buildings. And now there is no memory, and now we actually don't know how many
yeah.
people died in Mariupol because the buildings were demolished. So it's all one mass grave with countless murdered people, and we have no idea how many people they actually killed.
I mean, clearly,
And we will probably not know their
clearly,
names.
tens of thousands of people. I mean, you see what happened.
Precisely.
There's no way you can do this to a city and not kill thousands of people. Can I just
Yeah,
back?
yeah.
Can I just ask a bit more about how you went from being someone trying to understand fairy tale English to becoming an English teacher yourself? How did that happen?
through fairy tales. Um, yeah, that's what happens. Yeah, I read Mary Poppins, and I think she had a huge impact on me. Just this image of this teacher who is also a storyteller, who is, a magician, and who's, always looking perfect in her blue suit, always knows what to do, like very composed. Um, and then also Jane Eyre, I read it also as a child. I think I read all these books when I was still in primary school, and I was very, very sensitive. So I remember crying hard when I was reading Jane Eyre, and at some point there is this horrible school,
Yeah,
Lowood, and a girl dies there of, I think,
yeah,
typhus. I'm not sure, but generally it's horrible. There is an epidemic, and children are dying, and they are malnourished, and they are treated horribly by some of the teachers. And then there is one kind teacher who helps Jane, even though it could be potentially risky for her, but still she does that, and Jane herself becomes a tutor to an orphan, yeah, to a girl who is who really needs someone nice and kind. And also, there was one more book which made an impact on me. It is written by Rashad Nurigan-Tekin. It's a Turkish writer. So he was writing in the first half of the 20th century, and he wrote this book about a girl, Farida, who becomes a teacher in a tiny village in the mountains. And this is a horrible place, very poor, an extremely poor village, but she loves these children, and she tries to do something for them, so somehow to reform their lives, and to show them that life is not just this village. And I think those teachers in those books, they really made a big impression on me. And also I had very nice teachers of English always. So my first teacher, that was my private teacher, she lived not far from us, and her home was full of books, and she always traveled. The daughter was in the US, and she always brought home souvenirs, and she sang different songs with us in English, and we read books, and we played different games. So it was fun,
so you
and
kind of
it was just
a
like,
teacher.
sorry?
You kind of always knew you wanted to be a teacher.
No. I think maybe, because I wanted to be a performer. I wanted to be a singer or a dancer. So this was what I wanted to be, really. This was my dream. But at that time, when I started growing up a little bit, I realized that you couldn't really earn money with that unless you did something very popular, and I hated pop culture.
Yeah.
So, like at that time, we did have one group, very popular. Its name was Viagra. And this was a very nice representation of what they did. They just kind of posed in this, like, sexy poses, like very short dresses. And in the beginning, they were not even singing themselves. There was another singer who was employed to to record the songs for them in the studio. So when they started singing, they were actually just opening their
Yeah,
mouths,
yeah.
and the singing was done by someone else. So it was like completely not like Whitney Houston or whoever I wanted to be like, So um, it wasn't a good time to be a singer in the noughties. So I think I didn't want to become a teacher, but I kind of started helping people before, long before I became a teacher, because I was always a good student. I loved studying, and very often I found myself in this situation when I sit and explain to my classmates some topic, especially when it came to literature or history or biology. So some subjects that I was like really good at. I did that at school. I really remember doing that before our final exams. so something like General Certificate of Secondary Education. And we were sitting behind the school together in the playground. And I was just, okay, like, number one, blah, 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 number two, blah, blah, blah. And people were listening. And then I did the same at the university because I was always prepared for all exams, you know, I knew everything. So people would just ask me, can you tell me more about this thing? Like, what is going on there?
And what did you study at university?
I majored in English linguistics,
Okay.
obviously.
Okay. And then when did you start teaching, like properly teaching, like for a living?
Properly teaching when I was 21.
Okay.
It was my 5th year of studies, so I was doing my master's, and the university offered me a part-time position because, you know, I was such a model student, and they had this opening for 2 or 3 part-time positions for people, you know, who were also studying at the same linguistic university. And I said yes, and I was scared because, you know, I was 21 and my students were a little bit younger than me. So I was in my 5th year and they were maybe in their 2nd or 3rd year.
Yeah.
So I remember my first lessons, they weren't a disaster. I was just like super nervous. My hands were trembling, you know.
All that.
But yeah, and I also did some, during our 4th year of studies, we also did some stuff at school. It's called practice. So it's this 2 months when you're first watching the lessons at school and then you're giving lessons at a particular school. And at the end, you get evaluation. And this is the part of your yearly record. So everyone does that. And I realized that I loved teaching people. So it was fun. And especially when people are so young and they are still passionate, they are still interested, you know, their eyes light up. If you find the right tone of conversation, if you really build some kind of rapport with them, then they will watch you and they will listen. And then I realized that by teaching, you can make an impact. Because, you know, there were so many teachers who made an impact on me, and I can still remember what they did, what they taught me, you know. And I also saw a lot of bad teachers, you know, a fair share of angry and sad, you know, Snape-like teachers.
Yes.
So I've had all, you know, when I was reading the Harry Potter series, I was like, I recognize that, you know, because I think everyone has had a Snape and a McGonagall and so on, right? Everyone has had their favorite teacher, and I've had a lot of favorite teachers because I was a good student. And my English teachers have always been lovely. And I think my English teachers influenced me because they showed me so many beautiful things, you know, so many songs, so many books, so many things that I enjoyed doing with them. You know, it was never about the exercises, you know, like open the book and let's do exercise 6. It was always about some kind of context, some kind of conversation, singing Halloween songs together, you know, or having some celebration in the classroom during Christmas. So it was always this part of culture, you know, always this part of insight into the British culture, even though we didn't go to Britain. And I have never been in Britain myself, right? So I know your country through literature.
You know.
Yeah.
So can I ask about what you were doing and what your memory was of February 24th last year?
Oh, that's hard. I remember that, you know, I think it was during several months that we've had this conversation. Like, do you think they will attack? Probably no. So, you know, I would say that I was one of these people that were skeptical because, you know, I really believe in humanity. I'm an optimist. This is very bad for me right now, being an optimist. And I didn't believe, you know, I thought that it was all a big provocation, that they would use this provocation just to push some decisions, you know, and to manipulate the governments of other countries into doing what Russia wants.
Yeah.
So to the last day, I didn't pack my bag. I didn't believe that they would attack, and I didn't want to leave Kiev because at that time there was this talk that yeah, we need to learn how to pack this kind of rucksack that you travel with, and all the advice that I was reading, in on the internet, it kind of proved to me that I will not survive if I leave my home because I can't survive in the forest. I'm a child of civilization. I always lived in cities. I have no idea even how to start a fire or something. I don't drive. So I don't have a lot of survival skills in general. My main survival skill is talking. This is what I do for a living, and this is what I can do even if I'm sick or worried or, haven't slept.
And so
I wasn't prepared to leave, and I remember that the night before, we also had COVID, so
yeah,
at that moment, so we had this kind of thing that, I was almost getting better. My friend was still sick, so we were sleeping, and I went to bed really late, like at 3 a.m., and at 7, my mom woke me with a call and said the war has started. And I was like, I want to sleep so badly. Just let me sleep a few more hours. I just can't get up. And I remember that I didn't hear anything. That's the point. We lived in the center of
okay,
the city. So people who lived, in the suburbs, they saw and heard things
yeah,
in the morning, and we lived in the very center. So not far from Arsenalna.
yeah, okay.
And I didn't hear or see anything, so everything that I saw was on the internet only.
That must have been very strange.
Yeah, yeah. I had this feeling of, like unrealistic, like I hadn't woken
Yeah,
up completely. I couldn't believe it. I was shaking all over, and because we were still a little bit sick, it was like, not easy even to start concentrating. So I remember that probably the first, until like 6 p.m., we were just sitting in the corridor on the mattress because we read that we should take a mattress and put it in the corridor to have this like two
yeah,
walls. And that's it. We didn't even pack. We were just sitting there reading the news every single minute, like what is happening, what is happening. And I even didn't know whether I should go or no. We were not prepared, you see, and I know now that we should have prepared,
yeah.
but we didn't.
It's easy to be wise with hindsight,
Yep,
you know.
yep. Yeah, yeah, precisely. The war broke out in 2014. That's true. But the front line, it was always there in the
Yeah,
east. It never came so close to
yeah.
Kiev.
I mean,
That's the point. Like for 8 years we were living like that. Like we had this kind of double lives, right? So the war was going on, and our lives were also going on
yeah,
at the same time, every single moment. And it is still like this now. Now a lot of people don't understand that when war is going on in Ukraine, it doesn't mean that in every place of
yeah,
Ukraine at any given moment there is some warfare.
yeah,
It's not like that. Kiev can be shelled or bombed. So there can be like, 100 rockets in the morning, and when the rockets don't fall anymore and the siren goes off, people pack and go to work.
yeah,
Just as a
yeah.
routine. So this is a very, very sad and grim routine of the day, that whatever happens, you go to work.
But it's also a kind of act of defiance.
Yeah, it is defiance, and at the same time, like, is there any choice? You have to earn money, you have to have a salary, you have to do something, even if it is very dangerous for you.
Uh,
because like, what's the choice? So, on the 24th, I I did nothing, but on the 25th, we decided to leave because we spent 1 hour in the metro station.
Yeah.
And I thought, what if we spend here, days? I will go crazy.
Yeah.
And that's when I said, okay, let's pack our bags and leave when the metro is still open. And this is what we did. We went to our parents, to my parents, and we took a car and we went all the way to my grandparents in the west of Ukraine. And there, my friend and I sat on a train to Poland, on an evacuation train, and we never came back.
Yeah. Have you been back at all since?
Nope, I
Yeah.
haven't.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, it's like really
Yeah.
expensive. When we were going there, the evacuation train, the first evacuation train was free,
Yeah.
and the second one as well. And in Poland, it was also a free train. But now nothing is free anymore, and it's very expensive to go there. And also, I will have to leave my
Yeah.
work for some time, and I'm a freelancer. I get paid by the hour.
Yeah.
I don't get paid for the hours in which
Yeah.
I don't work. So it's kind of not easy for me, to plan such a trip when I have to support myself in a country which is much more expensive than Ukraine, and where I have to rent a flat, for
Yeah.
example,
Yeah.
which is also more expensive than in
Yeah.
Kiev.
Yeah.
So my life has changed very rapidly, and it's sometimes, really hard to try to focus on what is on my plate right now, because these are the things that I need to do, and if I don't do them, no one will.
Yeah.
Like, focus on work,
Yeah.
focus on chores,
Yes.
focus on earning money, focus on what is happening here and now, and not what is happening back home in Ukraine every single moment. So I have to switch between the two worlds, as a switch between the two languages,
Yeah.
as a switch between the two cultures, Ukrainian and Polish, as a switch between two lives. So I'm living two lives instead of one now.
And how's it affected your teaching?
A lot.
In what
Um,
way?
you know, you, I think I started focusing more on establishing contact with people. Then I always focused on that because, I'm not only a teacher, I started learning how to be a psychotherapist in 2018.
Okay.
So I've done a lot of studies in psychotherapy. And now I think I focus even more on establishing connection with people than before. I always say, hi, I'm Alina, I'm from Ukraine. I lived in Kiev before the war, and this usually starts some kind of conversation
Are you
with people.
face, or are you teaching online, Aline?
I teach online, I teach Polish students, adult professionals, because I teach business English. So it means that they come to me to learn something that will, enable them to do negotiations or work with other countries, or, have presentations for their foreign colleagues, etc. But I never hide that I'm from Ukraine.
Yeah.
And sometimes they ask me what it is like, what is going on? What do you think about Zelensky? What do you think about the war? What do you think about Russia? So sometimes they ask me and I answer honestly what I think. And sometimes, it's hard because I need to, like, when the Kakhovka Dam was blown up by the Russians, and it was such a devastating morning. And then, I had to stop crying and go to work and work. I can't just sit in my lessons and cry. I can tell them that I'm very sad because of what happened. I can tell them what happened, but I can't focus on that instead of work. So, juggling.
I found out on Monday, just before I was supposed to go and teach, that one of my ex-students from Kharkiv died on the front line near Bakhmut. I know that he had signed up and gone to fight, but I was teaching him last year, the first part of this year, and I was trying to contact him just to check he was
Oh my
okay.
God.
And I got an email from his partner basically saying, sorry, just to let you know,
Oh,
so he died. And it was literally like half an hour before I have to go and teach. And I was in the kitchen kind of
very hard.
making coffee, and then you kind of clean your face and you go in and you teach, and you're like, oh,
Yeah, yeah, like teacher face. Yeah, you put your teacher face
how are
on.
you? Yeah, fine, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of like
Yeah,
energy. I think work is my, work is my rock. I mean, I can hold on to it. Whatever happens, work still happens as well.
I,
And, people have been wonderful here. I found a lot of
yeah,
support among my Polish
yeah,
students. And, it was an interesting experience to see that people are so different and that there are much, much more people supporting Ukraine than I ever thought.
well,
Because, in Ukraine, we often say that the Westerners know nothing about our situation, but it's not always true.
the Poles have their own
Uh,
histories, you know.
Precisely. They have the same history with Russia. So they know exactly,
Yeah,
what kind of situation we have. And I think that's why they have much more empathy for us,
yeah,
because they had this experience quite recently. It was only in the 80s and the 90s that they kind of like, crushed their Soviet
yeah.
past,
I,
and started, moving to a different perspective.
and I think, well, you see the big demos today in Warsaw, and I know a lot of young Poles are really hoping for, a Polish future which has even less connection and sympathy for the Russian government and the Russian regime.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of
Mm-hmm.
discussion about the government's motives at the moment, and you know, I mean, yeah, it's still in the process of kind of decoupling itself from its past, I think, in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
But what frightens me is that I don't want us to forget the
yeah,
past,
yeah, yeah,
because there is this thing in psychology, we call it dissociation. When we dissociate something, we try to pretend it never happened. So we can dissociate a thought, an emotion. We can dissociate a part of our own bodies,
yeah,
actually. We can dissociate from our experiences, like, say that it never happened. It wasn't me. It was like another version of me. And really, the way out is through integration. Integration means, gathering all the parts of you together and being, again, one whole body who knows exactly what happened, who remembers, because our bodies physically remember all the trauma that we have had during life, but the body can also heal itself.
yeah,
And I know that for sure. Yeah, even broken bones, if they are not disturbed, they will set and they will grow back together. So, I would love Ukrainians not to dissociate from our historical past,
yeah,
but to remember it. Because if we don't remember, this is what happens.
yeah,
War happened
yeah,
because people didn't remember.
yeah,
And because we didn't remember and or didn't know, we couldn't believe what was happening. And we couldn't be ready because no one prepared us for that.
yeah. Well, it's funny because when you look back, it seems so obvious that it would have happened now,
Yeah.
and it's like,
It seems obvious because of the other countries. Yeah, I mean, because of Syria, because of Afghanistan, because of Georgia. And I think a lot of Ukrainians thought it can never
yeah,
happen to us.
yeah,
They were wrong.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It was interesting what you said about having to kind of represent Ukraine to Polish people that you're working with as well, because it's something
Yeah.
I've heard from lots of Ukrainians I know who are living outside of Ukraine now, which is, as well as just having to deal with life as a refugee and those two
Hmm.
separate, you're also put into a position where you have to be a kind of ambassador and a representative
Yeah.
for Ukraine, and to, one of my friends said she even has to have conversations sometimes, like in supermarkets, where people go, "Where are you from,
Hmm.
Ukraine?" And you have to have
Yeah.
a whole conversation about what's it like there, what's going on, what's happening, and you're constantly put in a position where you have to represent the reality of the people back home, yeah? And
Hmm.
that must be draining and exhausting.
Well, I feel that this is my role, as a teacher in particular, that I don't do anything special, but when people ask, I answer.
Yeah,
So I don't go around and preach, but when people ask me questions, I answer
yeah,
honestly. And, I'm surprised with how much empathy I'm met with. Even, I often go to a bakery here, and Pani Elżbieta, the owner, I think she's in her 60s, and she says that her grandparents actually lived in Ukraine. They were Polish, but they ran in 1939 when the communists came from Russia,
yeah,
the Red Army.
yeah.
So her family had the same experience, and she always gives us a discount on cakes.
Ooh. So, can I ask difficult questions? Okay. Do you still have any family or friends or contacts in Russia? Have you had anyone contact
Oh,
with, or have you
um,
contact with?
that's problematic.
Yeah,
I I had many friends in Russia before 2014, and then most of them said, "Oh, we're staying out of
uh-huh,
politics." And I was like, what? Politics is kind of happening in my country. So, it's hard to stay out of it when it's like physically very close to you. And I actually did have some friends from Russia who escaped. They were Jewish. So, for Jewish people, it's not the
yeah,
first time. And actually, they both have also Ukrainian roots, so they are mixed
yeah, yeah,
ethnicity. So they used to have some grandparents from Ukraine, and with one of them, it was even funny that our great grandparents lived at the same time in the same vicinity. So they might have known each
yeah,
other, So this is fantastic, and this is precisely, yeah, the history, the turbulent history of this whole part of the land, yeah. And these two Jewish friends, they both immigrated to
yeah.
Israel, and one of them actually went to Ireland after that,
Okay,
and they're quite happy. So, I'm still in touch with them because they are anti Putin, and they were anti-Putin back home, and was very dangerous for
yeah,
them. So, you know, and there were some people, who originally came from Russia and who supported us. For example, one of my psychotherapy teachers, she has been living in Israel for many years, but she originally came from Russia, and I know that her project helped a lot of people, a lot of refugees. She has a project of cheap psychological help,
okay,
and a lot of people who work in this project, they are from many countries, and they volunteered and they helped a lot of Ukrainians who, were running, who were refugees. So, I think in this situation, I can't blame her that, the place where she was born is also the place which is Russia, you know. I actually don't think that we choose where to be born. So, this is life. I think what matters more is the choice that we
oh,
make. Because I don't,
oh,
of course, I know that there are, Ukrainians who are not ideal, and there are Ukrainians who are corrupt, for example. I don't want to name them, but they exist, and we all know them because they are in our
you
government.
know,
So,
hello from England,
you
we're
know,
similar problem.
yeah,
You know,
yeah, same problems, right? So,
corruption here,
yeah, yeah.
and
But I don't have anyone else. So right now, if I look back on the people that I once, hanged out with, I have no idea what they do now and how they are.
so I guess connected. I know just from looking at the names of the people that are here that we have Russians watching these videos, and I know
Mhm.
because my own previous history, there will be quite a few Russians who end up watching it. Is there anything you would say to them or ask them, or no comment, or Is there
You
anything you?
know, the first phrase that comes into my mind is "Fly, you fools," like Gandalf said in Moria before falling down and being devoured by Balrog. Because it's not even me saying that as a Ukrainian. It's just as a person who read about repressions a lot. I know how the repression machine works, and my family has survived it, but I know
Yeah,
families that didn't.
yeah,
And I don't think that there is anything that people in Russia can do right now not to be eaten up by this horrible mechanism that devours its own children and that doesn't need humans. It needs cannon fodder. It needs working hands and cannon fodder, and that's it.
I mean, I look at,
So,
I still know people inside Russia that I still talk to, and I look at what the school system is doing, and I know they have children, and I'm the same. I look at it and think they're grooming your children to die in
yeah,
time.
yeah,
You know,
they're conditioning
they're
them.
conditioning.
They are teaching them, they are already teaching them how to make drones for the war. They are telling your children that they can go to war, earn money by killing other people, and this is
Yeah,
normalized
and this,
on such a big scale.
yeah. I think it's also, I mean, the other conversation I have with lots of people is that at some point, whether you realize it or not now, at some point your choice will be to fight Putin or fight for Putin, because
Yeah,
they're going to run out of people that they can send. They'll run out of Tajiks and I don't know, people from Kyrgyzstan and Dagestan, and they'll run out of these people,
yeah,
and at some they'll start coming for students, and you know they'll come for everyone, because that's the machine
yeah.
requires more meat, basically.
Like, like guys, Google your own history. If you don't want to, if you can't Google it in Russian, even though you still can, right now there are still sites in Russian that will describe. Google the Memorial Society, that was banned
Yeah,
in Russia this year. Google it's called Возвращение имен. This is a thing that was done on Facebook for
yeah,
many years,
yeah,
when every year a volunteer reads a story of one person who was
yeah,
repressed and posts about this person on their Facebook page.
yeah,
I know that because I've had a friend from Ukraine who lived in Russia many years, and she was doing this every single year.
yeah,
And this thing never ran out of names. And when you read the stories, you are horrified, because most of people who were repressed, they were not guilty of anything at all.
yeah. There's a
Anything at
hell of a lot of
all.
teachers
They
who
were
write.
they were
Yeah,
innocent,
yeah.
and it never saved
Yeah.
them. Some of them supported the government. Some of them were like passionate communists. Google Trotsky and how he died. It's not a big deal. You can still Google that in Russia. There was never a person who was safe. Never. Even the people who were openly supported, even the people who wrote literature, who wrote songs, who made films, who wrote all kind of propaganda books,
Look
even these people were repressed.
in at the moment, you know. 1 minute Gherkin is kind of calling for genocide in occupied Donbass. The next minute he's in prison. Um,
Yeah.
it's like, if
Grim irony, right? Look at Prigozhin's death. Isn't it a little bit
yeah,
suspicious?
I mean, yeah, they're not people who honor these things.
Yeah, they don't have honor. People who had honor died in 1920s.
Yeah,
The last people who had honor were
yeah,
killed or died at the front
and then
line.
maybe,
Since then, the word honor does not
yeah,
apply. There was the situation in Ilovaisk in 2014, when there was a so-called green corridor that was open for the wounded soldiers to leave, and when the wounded soldiers entered it, they were
yeah. I
massacred.
remember.
These people do not have honor.
I
They're,
remember.
they are they are terrorists. This is nothing to talk. We can't talk to them. We can't negotiate with them. I thought, you know, it's actually a very grim thought, but before Kiev region was occupied, before the 24th, when I was not ready to leave Kiev, I was thinking that maybe we just stay in Kiev because there is nowhere to run to. And at that point, I actually didn't believe that evacuation would be organized. So I thought that, the government would just escape and leave Ukrainians to die on their own in the ways they wanted. So
I
I thought that maybe if we stayed in Kiev, it wouldn't have been so bad because, even when the Nazi occupied Kiev, they didn't kill everyone on sight, right? So the city in the 1940s, during the occupation, was
yeah
still working.
yeah
And then Bucha
yeah
happened, several months later. And when we found out what was happening in Bucha, I realized that these people cannot be reasoned
yeah
with. My best friend was sitting in a cellar in Irpin. They were lucky they survived, and they were later saved by volunteers. But they had, there were like 2 months when we didn't know whether she was still alive at all. And one of my other friends was in a house in Kiev district, so she was in a village, and the Russian soldiers were in her village. And at that time, they didn't set landmines in the whole forest. So they escaped through the forest only because there weren't landmines. Because if you went by a highway, you were
yeah
shot, no matter who it was, child, old people, women. They didn't care. The soldiers, they were very young, a
yeah
lot of them, and they were already killers, and there was no
yeah
reasoning with them.
yeah
They could shoot just for fun, and this is one thing I think we didn't
yeah
understand. We
The
hadn't understood before.
reality of what you were dealing with,
Sorry?
the absolute brutality of what you're dealing
Yeah.
with.
It's not even the brutality, but it's so
Yeah
senseless. Like
yeah
sometimes the things they did, they didn't have any reason. There was no reason. We were always trying to find some reason. Why are they doing this?
because they can.
And the only answer, because they can. Yeah, because this is what abusers do, and this is what terrorists do. They do things that they can, and they will not stop. Even now, I constantly see in the news that in Russia, when people come back from the war, they start killing people
Yeah
in the
yeah
neighborhood. Because why not?
yeah well, and because you're already broken by that point, and
Yeah, yeah. And they have PTSD, and they have no respect for human life, and their own dignity has been robbed. So they don't care about human rights at that point. They care about getting rich, taking out golden teeth out of the mouth of someone that you've killed, killing someone, and grabbing their stuff and sending it home. I was shocked when I learned that the Russian troops that were standing in Bucha and Irpin sent home to Russia hundreds of kilograms of
yeah
things. And this was all registered. So this was all registered, written down. We know how many kilograms. We know who did that.
yeah
We know the names.
yeah no, I mean, I was following all that. I guess you also saw this week the very detailed investigation into the shootings on the Zaporizhia highway. I don't know if you.
Oh my God, no, I didn't, but
I mean, again,
oh, that's
saying
that's the point,
it's
yeah.
just it was just random, brutal,
Random,
brutal killing for the hell of it because you can.
yeah, because it can. And the point is that they have been doing it for many years in other countries like
Yeah,
Syria, and we never knew that because in Syria not everyone has a mobile phone.
yeah,
I think when they started fighting in Ukraine, what they didn't realize that Ukraine is so much more technologically advanced. It's not a
and
village.
there's more.
Mainly, Ukraine is a city
Yeah.
territory. Everyone has a mobile phone, everyone has a Wi-Fi, everyone has internet, people have satellites, so they had connection, and a lot of things were filmed and
Yeah.
photographed just, the moment it happened.
Yeah. I think the fact that Ukrainians themselves, as civilians, kind of mobilized in this way and
Mm.
recorded things and used their language skills to share these things. And I think Syria also suffered because there weren't as many people who spoke English.
Yeah.
And
There wasn't coverage, not only from the media like journalists, but from the people themselves. People themselves would not be able to speak to anyone who would, to anyone who would listen. No one listened.
yeah, yeah. So I've got about
I'm really scared that one day, people will say that we are tired of listening to Ukrainians.
this is what I was.
This is my greatest fear, this is my greatest fear that one day the Western world will like, okay, I hope they give the territories to Russia and everything just finishes and we don't have to do anymore. Already here in Poland there are two radical
Yeah,
parties
yeah,
who are saying this isn't your war and let Ukrainians go home. And they kind of, omit the fact that most Ukrainians who are in Poland are working
yeah,
and are buying things for millions of
yeah,
zloty and are also paying taxes and bringing into the budget a big, big part of money that didn't exist before. Opole has like 1,200 people in it, and it is kind of a depressed city because it doesn't have a lot of job
yeah,
opportunities. It doesn't have any big plants. It doesn't have any production. So people here mostly work in some traditional places, bakeries, shops, cafes, schools, university, so there aren't a lot of job opportunities. So people who live here, they spend their own money and, invest it in Opole's economy. It's not like Opole gave us a lot.
yeah,
I got no help from the Polish government because I'm an adult. I don't have children. I don't have any disabilities. I'm healthy. Yeah, so I didn't get any financial support. I rent my own flat. I pay taxes. I buy food on a regular basis and so on. And there are a lot of people like me, people who don't get any financial support and rather by living somewhere support the economy of the place where they are living. And now it's very convenient to say that Ukrainians are only taking, because of course, when you think of Ukrainians, first of all, think of this, like normal refugees, so people who ran without any clothes, without any things, without a car. They ran by vacation train. They have small children. Very often, they also have a disabled parent or parents or grandparents. And of course, they have to get financial support because there are not enough workplaces. Uh, so the market just cannot satisfy the need to get a job. I'm lucky because I know English. I'm lucky because I can work
yeah,
online. My job can be
yeah,
remote. So, I'm in a privileged position because I started working in April, and I started working for the company, Polish company, for which I work right now, in May last year. So after a month since I moved in Poland, I found a job and started working. And as a freelancer, I don't have vacation. So I
yeah.
just work all the time.
And
And it's very convenient, for those parties to say that Ukrainians are only here to take things from Poland because you can see Ukrainians who get help because they are very visible. They look lost, they are tired, they have small kids,
yeah,
and of course they need all kind of support because they cannot work because they
yeah,
have children, small
yeah.
children, and there are not enough kindergartens. So most of them just have to sit at home. It's not their choice. It's what just the
I
situation.
think the other thing that's often not spoken about is if Ukraine is somehow abandoned or forced to accept. some kind of deal, the refugee crisis we've seen so far is going to look small in comparison. That be tens of millions of people coming into Europe to escape Russian occupation because they've seen what happens under Russian occupation.
Yeah. And even worse, one of my Polish students said, okay, Ukrainians can come to Poland, but where are the Polish going to run to? We have nowhere to run to.
Yeah. I mean,
if the Russian troops, went further and crossed the Ukrainian border and went to Poland, which they already did in 1939, right? So for them, it's nothing new. When the Second World War started.
They talk about bombing Poland and bombing England on Russian TV every day.
Mm-hmm.
This is part of the kind of fever dream of the Russian imperial mindset.
Wet dream, I would say, yeah. Let's how do they say that? Let's bomb the centers where decisions are made.
Yeah. And I mean, you probably saw today the British government, one of the few good things this government has done, I think, is they're now talking about sending British troops to train in Ukraine. And of course, Medvedev has been at the vodka again and is basically saying this means that, it's okay to target these people. We can target their country. And I think it's an existential threat for the whole of Europe, because if we don't deal with this collectively, it's not going to go away, this problem. Moldova will go. And if Moldova goes, then Estonia will go. And Russia makes it very clear that it's not going to stop until it's stopped.
Precisely.
And it doesn't have it doesn't have a
and
we can always add more bits. So can
I used to have a friend in Latvia, and she said it was, I think, like 2017 when I visited her in Riga, and she said, if Russia attacks us, our army will fold down like a paper house in hours. We will only fight them for hours, and after that they will just come to Riga and occupy the whole Latvia. Latvia is small. It will never be able to fight against Russia.
Moldova's small.
Yeah, and Ukrainian army really helped by destroying those forces that were supposed to attack Latvia and Litva, all these countries that are around, because there used to be this part of the army that was, I forgot how you call it, these guys who go down with parachutes, like super strong, like the best. Precisely, and a lot of them were already killed in the first year of the full-scale war, so no one to come to Latvia now.
And I think the rest of Europe perhaps still doesn't quite appreciate the degree to which Ukrainian sacrifice has made Europe safer. And I mean, for me, I still feel that we owe this kind of huge debt of gratitude to Ukraine and to Ukrainians for what Ukraine has done to protect Europe, to protect freedom, to protect democracy, to kind of fight for the rule of law, and to fight for the respect of international boundaries, and to fight tyranny. And if there's a European value, those are European values for me, and I think Europe forgets that at its peril. Can I finish with one question, Alina? Because I'm going to dash off in about 10 minutes. So my question is, you said earlier...
Yeah, and I just wanted to say that today we've had the calendar change, so I forgot about it. But today it's the Defenders' Day, actually, in Ukraine, October 1st. It used to be October the 14th, but now it's October 1st. So today we say thanks to all the people who are and who have protected us since day one, and a lot of them volunteered, and a lot of them had no previous training. They had never been soldiers in their entire life. Like my friend from the singing courses. I used to be in a singing group in Ukraine, and my friend, she's this tiny girl, and she is a paramedic now on the front line for the second time in her life, because she was there in 2014, came back, and in 2022 she went there again.
Wow.
And she's so small, and when I look at her, I don't know how she carries this, soldiers, how she saves their lives, but she does every day. Her name is Nasta, and I hope that one day we will be able to sing together again. I hope that she survives and that I survive and that one day we meet.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. So can I finish with one final question? You said earlier you were an optimist, okay? And it's not
Still am.
not an easy world to be an optimist in. How are you feeling about the coming months and year?
Oh, mixed feelings actually. I believe that Ukraine is going to win in the end, but I just don't know when it happens. I really, I had the hope that the full-scale war would be finished in 1 or 2 years, and I see that this is not going to happen. So, unfortunately, Russia still has a lot of resources, and the way they are waging war has changed. So now it's not only the cannon fodder, it's the everyday drone attack, every day in multiple cities, and they can produce these drones on a big scale. So I think my parents haven't slept a night properly since the beginning of the full scale because they are in Kiev. So almost every night the drone attack happens, and sometimes the rockets are also added. So it means that Ukraine sadly can't win this war on its own because we are a very brave but not a very big country, and our resources are limited. So, if the West, the global West, doesn't continue to help Ukraine, Ukraine will lose, and then they will come for you because there is no one who can stop them, no one else.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that this is Putin's war. I believe that there are countless people who support this regime because they get benefits from it, and this is the kind of the regime that communists have built. Yes, so they built a situation in which it is profitable for many people to support the government because this is how they get something for themselves: life, salary, better opportunities. And unfortunately, they are not going to give it away and just, say, oh, we are so sorry, we will pay the reparations. It's not going to happen. It can only be stopped by force. So it's not the time for negotiations. It's not the time for peaceful protests, for kumbaya, kumbaya, because, maybe this time was like 30 years ago in the 1990s. Maybe if then there had been a collective kumbaya, kumbaya, maybe then the FSB wouldn't have come to power yet again in the 1990s, and maybe the world would have been quite different. Unfortunately, this is not the version of the reality that we are dealing with. And we are dealing with the version of reality where, a bloody war can be stopped just by brutal force and by intelligence and by uniting and by having, this common belief in what you've said, the values, and just this is a choice of civilization. Like where is the world heading? Are we heading again to the world of big totalitarian empires who rule nations without asking them what they want and who, overcome and kill and terrorize everyone who disagrees? So are we moving towards the world of North Korea? Or are we moving towards the world that I thought the world was going to be, so humane, and liberal, and with people having rights and with civilization happening and thriving? So this is the choice. It's not difficult to explain it. This is not like there are many versions of the truth.
So I'll just try to finish by saying thank you to you for being such an articulate and passionate representative of everything that I think is important about Ukraine and what Ukraine's doing. To the people watching, if you're not in Ukraine, thank you for watching and for listening to Ukrainians speak and tell their sides of the story. And if you're in a country where you get to vote and it's a meaningful vote, please try to make sure you vote for parties which support continuing military assistance for Ukraine and continuing support for Ukrainians displaced by the war. And if you're watching this in Russia, at least please know the truth, if nothing else, and know the reality of what's happening and what Russia is doing in Ukraine and the impact it's having on the rest of us, particularly on Ukrainians, but also on everyone all across Europe and all across the world. Thank you very, very much, Aline. I'm going to go before I start crying, as usual, at the end of these talks, which is usually what happens. I then go into the kitchen and my wife's sort of like, why do you talk if they make you cry? You know.
Because crying means that we are human, you know, that we have a heart. Even when it breaks sometimes, you know, it feels, while you're still feeling you're alive. This is what I believe, you know. Sometimes I start my day with crying because of so many things, you know, so many overwhelming things. And then I find that there are so many people whose hearts are also so big that they can think not only of themselves, but of someone else. And, you know, in you, I actually found a great friend of Ukraine. And this was not something that I expected. There's, you know, still a big surprise for me that, you know, you work relentlessly every day, writing about Ukraine, for Ukraine, supporting Ukrainians, and, you know, this never ceases to amaze me that there are so many kind people in the world. You know, I think that this is why this world still has a hope, you know, some kind of hope for the future, because I see the people who have hearts like that. So thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for everything that you have done.
And thank you for your time, and Slava Ukraini.